Thank you for joining us. So where are we? We're inside Trumpington Pot Primary School in central Cambridge, a state-funded school. With me is Terry White, my co-author of Planning Learning Spaces, the book, and Bhavini Pandya, who heads up the Gratnall's Learning Rooms project and a former teacher for 10 years. Later, we'll also be hearing from Sandra Jenkins in New Zealand. For those of you who attended the Guess exhibition last year, you may remember us as launching the book in what feels like an eon ago. So why did we write the book? Well, we wanted to bridge the gap between school architects and designers to the learners and teachers that actually use their spaces. So we brought together a wide range of talents from across the world and focused on working in partnership to create new and better learning spaces fit for the 21st century. And we've had lots of interest, and many schools are using the publication as a process to help them think through and develop the critical links between pedagogy and the design of space. We recognised that to support schools, we needed to develop a process-driven design framework that would help to make this a reality. Our next phase was putting planning learning spaces into practice with partner schools in different countries, including New Zealand. One of those schools is here in Cambridge, where I'm standing right now. So, to explain more, I hand you over to Terry White.
Thanks, Murray. One of the things that has been important to us over the last couple of years is in putting planning learning spaces into practice, our concern has been that we understand the links between pedagogy and space. And the key thing for us to consider is that we need to understand the learning and teaching activities that are taking place in a space before we go in and design it. That's something that's often neglected, and it's something that's really important and a key part of our process. Our approach that we have developed creates a structured framework for all stakeholders in the design process. And what it ensures, as you can see, is more time is spent engaging with all staff early in the design process. We have a greater focus on pedagogy and next practice, developing our spaces, and we have a strong recognition of the importance of observable behaviours that we can use to define what learning will look like in the spaces we're designing together. And so in a way, I would sum that up as saying that staff are creators, not consumers, of the new relationship between pedagogy and space. So in working forward in this way, and this presentation will go some way to describe that for you, we're going to take you through our framework, which will show the process that we're going to go through and the process that we've used successfully in a number of schools, both in this country and abroad. One of the things that's been often neglected in planning new spaces and changes in schools is the way in which those changes and those new spaces need to relate to the vision, the values, the mission and the ethos of a school. Many architects and educators over the last 2 to 3 years have recognised that it's not just about form following function, but it now must be about form following the vision, the ethos, the culture, and the way that a school operates and the way that a school works. So the framework that you can see in front of you now is the way we've looked at this. It starts with the vision, values and the ethos of the school, which needs reaffirming, checking, especially when you're going through change. It then needs to move directly to engaging and empowering the whole staff through school review. And fundamentally, it says, is your vision day by day being translated into practice that you and your colleagues can observe? And that's critical for the process that we're developing. Once we've done that, we then look on your current practice, the current learning and teaching, what's working well, what needs to be improved and what needs to be developed. And Bhavini will be explaining that in the next part of our presentation. So the important part that we take from that is that we're translating those new intended learning behaviours into design principles. We use those to ensure that we have some definition of what we're structuring and working with you. When we've done that, we then ensure that everybody is testing out and looking at the way they could be organised, the way they could be worked. We then use that to design the new learning environment. And where possible, as you see on our diagram, prototyping, testing out, using spaces that could be colonised to look at how this might work, we found very valuable in developing our approach to new spaces, especially where remodelling schools is important. But then very much part of that process becomes the communication strategy, how we and you communicate that to all the other people that need to know what's going on. And you'll see that the last part of our framework is actually developing a strategy that starts to reflect across the whole school and to decide how we can learn from the experience. And on that last part of our framework, one of our team, Professor Peter Barrett, author of The Clever Classrooms, Peter's involved because Peter feels that this process, for the first time, starts to look at learning and teachers, young people and schools driving and being at the centre of change in planning learning spaces. I'm now going to hand over to Bhavini, who's going to take you through the process we use in working with schools to translate the behaviours around learning and teaching into current and next practice. And this is the way we help shape our new learning spaces.
Thank you, Terry. So as a former teacher myself, I recognise the value and importance of working with teachers and students when looking at the design of learning spaces. As Terry has just explained the process we take our schools through, the key part of our approach is that we work closely with all key staff involved. I'm going to illustrate in a few ways how our team have been working with schools as part of our project. At the very beginning, we work closely with the staff to recognise and highlight what is currently working well in their spaces, and then we look at the ways that they want to enhance for their next practice. By drawing on aspirational learning outcomes for the students, we ensure that these are embedded into the future practice design principles. After this, we work with the staff to define the learning behaviours and activities that they want to see in the space. We have to work backwards in our model so that we know what the end result is that we're working towards. Once the design brief has been developed, it has to be tested with all the key stakeholders to ensure that the learning behaviours and activities can be carried out effectively. Throughout the process itself, there are plenty of opportunities to reflect and evaluate what the staff have put into the design brief, and we know this is important if it's going to have a positive impact on the learning and teaching taking place. One example of this would be the vision of this school wanting to ensure that students would take more ownership of the way that they learnt within the classroom. To achieve this, the staff wanted to have tables that could be reconfigured in different ways to allow students to regroup effectively for different learning purposes. And now I'll hand over to our New Zealand project facilitator, Sandra Jenkins, who will explain how Grey Lynn School have been led through our approach.
In 2019, Grey Lynn School participated in the Planning Learning Spaces pilot. We facilitated a series of 7 workshops, and this enabled the teachers to collaboratively reflect on bringing the vision of Grey Lynn School to life through their teaching and learning opportunities. Doug constructed 1 to 40 scale models of the learning spaces based on the architect's plans. These models helped the teachers to make sense of the space and to consider how to set up their whole learning hub across the floor to support the organisation and delivery of teaching and learning activities. Doug followed up the facilitated zoning workshops by working collaboratively with the teams of teachers to develop their zoning of the spaces. The teachers were then encouraged to co-construct their own metaphors with the learners on the naming of the spaces and the language of learning and behaviour in these spaces relating to the use of these areas. These workshops supported the staff to really drill down, reflect, and collaboratively work on what teaching and learning would look like in their new learning hubs as they moved from single classrooms into a collaborative space. The teachers also worked on setting their learning zones up. They really drilled down to think about what these settings were and how they could support teaching and learning with a lens on student agency and choice. Following the Planning Learning Spaces workshops, I worked with Alicia, the principal of Graylands School, and we focused on the strategy for change. This process enabled us to develop a transition plan that has a lens on the curriculum experience, organisation of learning, and community engagement. This transition plan ensures that there is a systematic approach and that school leaders and teachers and the school community have a clear understanding what teaching and learning will look like at Graylands School. Teachers and learners find the Planning Learning Spaces approach adds values to curriculum delivery as teachers shift from the my space from single cell classrooms to the we space, collaboratively teaching and learning across the hub.
The school vision, while easily spoken, requires the leader of the school, the principal, to enact and make action of our vision. Our leadership team has been provided with incredible support and a very specific way of thinking so that systems and processes can support our people to make that vision a reality in our spaces. The Planning Learning Spaces framework has provided an opportunity for us in our school to develop clarity around how the learning is organised here. The teachers in any school organisation have the greatest impact on whether an experience in learning is positive or negative. Therefore, the outcomes that we're seeking through the very specific ways that we're thinking of working with planning learning spaces has really forced us to think about what our practice used to look like in a single classroom, in a single cell space, and how we move to a collaborative environment. It's truly a case of moving from me to we.
We continue to work with Alicia and her staff at Graylands Primary School on the transition plan, supporting teachers to make the best use of these spaces for the organisation of teaching and learning. The Planning Learning Spaces framework has been delivered through a combination of online and face-to-face workshops. We are willing to continue this model of delivery for our future work in schools. Now, back to you, Terry, in Cambridge.
Thank you, Sandra, for that contribution. One of the reasons why we have been keen to share with you the work that Sandra is doing in New Zealand is that the Planning Learning Spaces framework can be applied to a range of schools in different countries and in different contexts. And many of you may be aware that New Zealand has a very progressive education policy where it wants collaboration to be a key part of staff and student learning. And so spaces that are collaborative, where staff work together, where people can look at the ways in which the space can really add more value to the learning is important. And the example for New Zealand, we have more information on our website that you can go into, but it's just to emphasise that that's something that we believe is important in working with you across the world. I'll now hand over to Murray to close the session.
So thank you very much. That was Terry White, Sandra Jenkins and Bhavini Pandya. So if anyone has any more questions, please ask and we'll do our best to answer them.